It's almost time to begin. If you don't have one of these red books, there's some more on the table. We printed a few more off. There's some more on the table out front if you want to get you a book. And we'll be on lesson number 4 when we start. And before that, we just need to keep all those folks in our thoughts and prayers that are on the sick list, those that are recovering from various things, those that are in various stages. Sheila's over there nodding her head. Yes, can you? Okay. And anyone else that we need an update on? Okay. Brother Will, would you say a prayer for us before we begin class, please?
Dear God, thank you for this day. Thank you for letting us come together to learn about you. Please be with those who are sick and are dealing with various issues. Please help them to get better soon. We ask that you be with those who are traveling, that they might get to their destination safely. Please watch over the teachers as they teach us today about your word. And in your son's name we pray. Amen.
I will remind you that it was mentioned Wednesday night, maybe last Sunday, that tonight is the youth devotional. So anybody that wants to stay around after service tonight then can participate in that. Today's lesson is called, the title of it is Honor and Beauty in Marriage. And it goes to 1 Peter 3, first 7 verses of that is where they get a lot of the text. But then when it starts out, I'm going to try to follow the outline a little closer than I did last week. But when I get to the very first word, subjection, it gives me some aggravation, because I think personally that people today have a misunderstanding of just what the word subjection means. And that is because through history, subjection meant that you did things by force. You force another country to do your will, submit to you. You do other things to force people to be subjected to. But as we look through here, I think that we will find that if we use the definition that's 14 layers deep under that word, that it's not as grievous a word as people make it out to be. Because today, in today's society especially, when they get to the part of the scripture that says a wife should be in subjection to her husband, what do they always come out with? Women's rights. You can't tell me what I'm going to do, what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to be subjected to anyone. Well, that's where I think the word has a little bit of misunderstanding. Because if you get right down to it, there's not a person in here, there's not a person in the United States that is not subjected to somebody else's authority at one time or another, even the President of the United States. President Biden, right now, if the situation dictated and his security team that surrounded him, got in a huddle and started escorting him off a stage or to a safe room or wherever, who's in control? Pardon? Not him. The security team. So he is, and that's why I say I think if we look at the word subjection from a little bit different angle, we'll get a whole new understanding of it. Brother Terry and Brother Jim and I are all elders. At one time or another, through our course of being an elder, we have submitted to I have submitted to Jim's understanding of something. I've submitted to Terry's understanding of something, and vice versa. When we go into a meeting, we just talk, and when we come out, we're all on the same page. But there's give and take there. And when it comes to the first part of that that says subjection to government, how many of us today, let's not get into politics on this. Let's just look at the government in general, okay? Not a political debate. How many of us, regardless of who's president, regardless of the administration, and I've lived through a few, are 100% in agreement with what they do? I'd venture to say none of us. I know I don't like my taxes going for certain things, but I'm a citizen of the United States, so I submit to that. If you go to Acts chapter 5 and verse 29, in Acts chapter 5, we'll get to 29 a little bit later, what had the apostles been told not to do? Not to preach, not to teach, but they did it openly. And what did they say? We ought to do obey God rather than man. So when we today subject ourselves to government rule, I suppose the best way to look at it is during this pandemic that we have going on right now. When it first hit, the government was trying to shut down everything, and they were even being subjective in the places. They would shut down a church that you couldn't assemble, but they would leave the pot houses open so people could go buy pot. Made absolutely no sense there. Fortunately, in this day and age, with our technology, we were able to submit to government rule and not gather and do it over the internet. But when it comes down to submitting to government rule, if they came out right today and said there will be 0 people meeting, assembling, it's our responsibility at that point to the government, if they don't have a valid reason for us to work with them, God. Then when we move into subjection to employees or employers, unless you own your business, and even when you own your business, you still have, you're subject to taxes and authorities and laws and regulations. But if you're or employed by someone, you're subjected to their rules and regulations if you want to keep that employment. He says we're having some kind of problems or some issues, so I'll talk around him while he does this. I'm sorry? I'm subjected to technology, okay? But employers, now there's some that want to take this to an extreme. Personally, I have been employed where I had to work some Sundays. God tells us to assemble on Sundays. Where does that come into play? Should we not take a job that requires us to work Sundays, Wednesday nights? Somebody else talk now. If there is an option, okay. Sometimes there's not options. There's times where I've had to work 10 days in a row, even in the military, other things. So if when I owned a business, that I should have been open on Sundays and late Wednesday nights. I had a bait and tackle shop. When do most people go fishing? On the weekends. I owned a bait and tackle shop, not for very long because I wouldn't open on Sunday. I closed in time to get to church on Wednesday night. I did not sell cigarettes or alcohol. I was set up for failure from the very beginning. For those of you that fish and hunt, you know what I'm talking about. So, but I enjoyed the business when I had it. So everybody is subject to somebody at some time or other, and even it can be on a rotating basis. Every time Donnie asked me to go fishing with him, as soon as I get in his vehicle, I am subject to his rules. It's his car, it's his truck, his boat. When I fished regularly and my partner and I would go alternate, same rules applied. When I was in his vehicle, he was in control. When he was in mine, I was in control. So that can rotate, and when it gets down to a marriage situation, the same rules apply. That it says women are to be subjected to their husband. And what does that mean? No matter what they do? Yes, sir.
I think it goes through these three things, especially the first one. It shows us, as you've already mentioned, we don't always agree with what's going on with our government. We definitely don't work with our employers. He now deals with a situation where you have a wife and an unbelieving husband, so it's sort of the same thing. You've got opposite sides that are contrasting each other, at least to begin with.
Yes, sir. And, you know, a lot of these things could and should be worked out before marriage takes place, but the wife is supposed to be, I'm going to use the word meek and mild, and we'll get to that definition a little bit later, because being meek does not mean that you're a doormat that you're to be walked on. So there's things that take place that where by your way of life, if you continue to go to service, if that agreement's been made, and you continue to go to service, by your conversation, by your lifestyle, you might bring them around, but it does not give you the authority to start an argument every time you turn around. Yes, sir.
Excuse me. A wise husband will listen to his wife. He makes the decision. That's the way it's supposed to be. And she also has sway over him, in her opinion. Two of you make a decision, not one.
I'm going to go back to 1987, long time ago. When I transferred, and I think you'll, even though this has nothing to do with marriage itself, I think you'll see the image I'm coming up with. When I got to Korea, my commanding officer had been a pilot on a C-5. Trouble is, on a check flight, he landed with wheels up. On a check flight. What does that mean? That means if he's being checked out, there is a qualified pilot in the right seat. 2 qualified pilots are flying a C-5, and they come in wheels up. He lost his career as a pilot and was moved into accounting and finance. He had only been there for a couple of months, and he came down with a sharp decision, and I had a goofy captain at the time. Excuse me for you folks out there, but I had a goofy captain at the time. And when she told us what he wanted done, we said, and this is my exact words, we will do anything he wants, however, it is not wise for this reason. She went and told him, they said it can't be done. Now, remember, he's used to flying a C-5. What happens with a pilot in an aircraft? They are boss hog. There is no time for debate. There is no time for discussion. When he wants something done, it's done at that instant, because it might just mean whether or not that plane stays up or goes down. However, in the accounting and finance field, we're not under those time constraints. So when he come over hot under the collar and started almost screaming, and then I told him what I said, and the captain didn't relay the information right. I told him that very thing. I said, when you were on that aircraft, I said, there was no time for discussion. I said, here it's a whole different ball game. I said, we got time to talk things over and do things right. He mellowed out, and by the end of his tour over there, we were getting along great. He was learning this cooperative nature. Yes, sir.
I've seen a lot of people who get married through my lifetime, and they're of the type where they say, no, every decision's gonna be mine. I'm gonna decide everything. I'm gonna run this household. You've been married almost 50 years. We've been married 40 years. I have not made every decision in our marriage, and I will not, because there's some things I don't know a whole lot about that she does, because she's a woman. She knows how to do things. I don't care what color paint is on the wall. I don't care any of that kind of stuff. I got other things to worry about. Those marriages normally don't last very long. It's not. Being subject to your mate is not the same thing as being his slave.
There you go.
And I can't balance a checkbook. I'll tell you that right now.
And being head of the house, as the Bible outlines, does not mean you always do things your way. It means that you do things the way that is best for both of you. So, like I said, with this first word just sort of messed with me a little bit, but that's where we are. So, being subjective also just means that you listen to your mate and you do things that are to the benefit of both. It's not always my way or the highway, as the old saying goes. And that's an excellent point. So, any other questions, comments then through this? Because the last part was said, like Christ did to the Father. Did earthly Christ agree with the Heavenly Father in all things? Now that's sort of a trick question, but in reality it's not.
But he was in subjection.
What happened in the Garden of Gethsemane? Let this, I don't want to die. Let this cup be taken from me. However, your will is going to be the one followed. So, earthly Christ, and that's the reason I phrased it earthly Christ instead of Christ the Father there. But he didn't want to die, but yet he knew the answer before he asked the question, didn't he? But he still had to pose the question. So even during his suffering, he was subjected to a higher authority. And if we place ourselves under that high authority and then work our way down, I think we'll be a little bit better off. Number B on that says the meaning of subjection is to give yourself to another person. And that's where I started out with that the word has a bad reputation because we always think about it being done by force or being done by coercion. But if you submit to somebody else's will, like the employer, even though you don't agree with 100% of the time, if they tell you to go in on Sunday and do an inventory's got to be done, you got to go work. That happens to be your regular schedule, and that's what you got to do, you got to do. But you do that willingly. You have voluntarily submitted. There is no force or is no coercion for that. Yes, sir.
How many do you suppose premarital counseling is a popular thing that if you sat down to and talked about subjection, they decide we don't like that, or maybe we're going to change the vows that we won't leave subjection out of this. In present day, it's more and more popular.
Well, that has some of these folks that do their own vows, write their own vows and all, they do leave out that part. And as I say, I think it's because they have a misunderstanding of what it really means. But all it means is you're under the authority of another. Could be willing, could be unwilling, but in a marriage it should be willing agreement. Then what does it not mean? It says Jesus is in subjection to the Father. No, it didn't say that. It says does not mean inferior. And then Jesus is in subjection to the Father, but as we said, he's also on an equal plane. But he deferred to Christ the Father. Similarly, a wife rules the house with her husband. That's in 1 Timothy 5:14. For many years of our marriage, you said we're going on 50 years. For many years of our marriage, I sort of taunted Andrea and told her that one of these days I'm going to retire and you're going to go to work. Well, that's the way it worked out, but not necessarily by that design, but when I retired from the Air Force and did a few things, retired, and she was the worker. But before she went to work, she was what's commonly referred to as a stay-at-home mom. She did not call me up 10 times a day, sometimes not even one time a day, and ask me what to do about the house. She ruled the house. She run the house. Matter of fact, on one occasion, she wouldn't even let me in her house until I took my clothes off outside and she hosed me down. Because I'd been wading in a muddy swamp. But, I don't know any other way to say it other than marriage is a partnership. Yes, the man is the final decision, but if a man makes a decision, the final decision, the way God approves of him making that decision, he has taken into account the wife's desires and needs and what is best for both. Married to a Christian makes it so much easier. Yes, sir.
Along with what David just said, but he emphasizes 1 Timothy 5:14, but he doesn't give the reason at the end of the verse of why there is to be this guidance and submission. He says, so that you don't give the adversary, Satan, an opportunity to speak reproachfully. So there's an order and roles as far as each of these go.
Right.
Larry,
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, I'm kind of taking this as we're going along, but all of these things, in my opinion, if you really find your mate, you're going to love them and give them trust, and obeying them is going to just be an easy thing to do anyway, because if you love somebody and trust them enough, it should be easy to follow what they want you to do. Like if you are subject to your government, I mean, I don't necessarily like everything the government does, but I love my country in general. I mean, my employer, I may not like everything they do, but I definitely like the benefits I get from the job. So I have to trust what's going on there, so I know I'm going to get a paycheck every week. And if you, Christ is an example, he's, we love him because we have that hope, So we have to kind of give ourselves a little bit and be trusting of what's going on.
I think you used to me what is the key word in a marriage, and that is trust. If there is no trust, you got problems. If there's trust, you can work through just about anything. Any other questions, comments?
I think we always talk about submission and how everybody finds that difficult and how that's like kind of a hard job. And it can be, but we also forget how hard it is to be the one that the buck stops with. You know, the burden of decision is on you. Sometimes as a wife, it's nice to say, I've given you my input and I'm just gonna do what you say, you know. And so there is equal burden on both sides, but different roles.
That's true, and going back to what Jackie said, it is easy for you to do that because you trust that what he does after you've given him your input is going to be what is in your best interest, right? If you didn't trust him to do that, you wouldn't allow him to have the final say, would you? Oh, I'm putting you. I think you get the point. Anything else?
It should be part of building your relationship too, and then isn't that what we're doing as we learn more about God's word and trusting God? As a new Christian, I mean, I'm not new now, but as a new Christian learns, you have to kind of be willing to trust God as you develop your relationship with him.
That's quite true. And the second part there says chaste behavior coupled with fear. The fear is, godly fear is respect, not fear of quaking in your boots fear. Well, but mostly if you look at it from the respect end, and this goes both ways. It's talking about the woman here, but it's also the man. It says chaste behavior, faithful to him. Why are you faithful to him? You're faithful out of respect. For the man, why are you faithful to your wife? Out of respect.
I'm 51 years old and I still have fear, respect for my parents. And that also goes with marriage too. You still need to respect each other.
And the reason I'm emphasizing the respect more than, as it was said, the quaking fear there. If you have no respect for someone, are you going to listen to them, to any of their advice, do anything that they suggest? How are you going to treat someone that you have no respect for? Versus how are you going to treat someone that you have total respect for? Y'all can answer.
This person here from verse 2 has no hope of ever winning their mate if they're not living the right kind of life. If they're going to be just like them, then there's not going to be any change ever at the economy.
Correct. And then item B on that said fear, which means respect toward husband. You see, as you go down through there, the fear was like of God, of government, of sinning. God works through those in authority. This sometimes is hard for us to understand, that God works through government authority. We sometimes sit back and say, if we look at things on a historical basis, why did God allow certain governments to be in place? Why did God allow Nazi Germany? Consequences of decision. See, I hadn't been able to ask God that question, so I don't know the answer. But God is in control. If you look at the Old Testament, it's very plain that through the Pharaohs, Nebuchadnezzar, all the Old Testament just shows you how many times he used government to get to what he wanted done. So, yes, sir.
It doesn't take away the freedom of choice on these bad people. They still are able to function in their way, whether good or bad, but the price will be paid.
I think it's important to underscore the fact here that just because God works through different things doesn't necessarily mean he causes them to happen. A lot of people have a backward view of why did God let this happen?
Mm-hmm.
Often it's not that way.
Yep. I agree. And then item number 3 says inward adornment. Woman is the beautiful half of mankind. Anybody disagree with that? You better not, huh?
I made the statement when I worked at the hotel. The owner came up and we were talking, and one of the guys said, well, the owner said, well, you met my wife before. And the guy said, yeah, she's quite a lady. I spoke up and I said, I never saw an ugly man that didn't have a pretty wife.
Okay.
So he goes a long way.
Okay. I think we would all agree here that the woman is the beautiful half of mankind. But her beauty is not only outward, it is also inward. We know this, but I think we need to state it anyway. What is outward beauty? I'm sorry? Physical appearance. And what is inward beauty? Character. Andrea doesn't remember this, but I don't think. But when we was in college in Searcy, Arkansas, there was this one young lady that was a Mississippi, I guess you would call her a debutante or some high society young lady. She was very beautiful. But as my dad would say, I wouldn't have her off of a Christmas tree, because her inward self was anything but beautiful. I mean, she wasn't a criminal or anything like that, but she had the attitude of, I'm better than everybody else. Better than everybody else is not inward beauty. Inward beauty is that meek, again, not doorstep meek, but mild, kind, generous. And I always like to go to 1 Samuel on this. What did God tell Samuel in 1 Samuel 16 and verse 7? Don't look at him because I rejected him because of his stature or this or that or the other. Man looks on people from the outside. How does God look at people? The heart. And that's what we need to do, is be more tuned in to the heart. Outward appearance also sometimes suggests apparel that they wear. The way they wear their hair, jewelry, clothes, etc. And their speech.
I was in Warner Robins, I forget why I was there, but as the break came along, the soldiers came outside, and there was one lady when she opened her mouth, it all went away. Her beauty was not inside.
Now, I don't want to step on anybody's toes. I don't want to start meddling here. But sometimes people even coming to church, the way they dress. Brother Quanch has had several sermons on modesty, how to dress modestly, and that is a key, modest. But there are also some who like to show off when they come to church, and when I was a youngster, we used to wear what we called our Sunday best, which meant coat, nice shirt, pair of pants, sometimes a tie if we could afford one. But then you get the ones who come in the fur coats. Back in those days, a $50 hat was a woo, but and their pearls and their diamonds, and they come strutting in. And why are they dressed up that way? When we got to remember, when we sit here before God, He sees us for who we are, not who we pretend to be. If they had decent, nice clothes to wear like everybody else, why do they come strutting around in their $10,000 necklaces and their fur coats and their... Man sees them, but what does God see when He sees that? So you can overdress the same way you can underdress. Modesty means appropriate dress. Now that I've stuck my toes out there to be stepped on, who's got a comment?
Some places in Tennessee you go, their cleanest pair of overalls and a white shirt if there's something.
Well, I've used that example before too. One of my great uncles, his Sunday go-to-meeting attire was bib overalls, a white shirt, and a sport coat. When the field clothes wore out, he used his Sunday go-to-meeting overalls and bought a new pair of overalls that went to church. That's the way he rotated his clothes. So it was the nicest he had at the time. So, yes, sir.
Again, when we're talking about this subject, physical attire is very important. There are very specific definitions of under and overdress. But we need to remember modesty is a lot more than just physical attire. It's an attitude that touches every aspect of what we do during our daily life.
Which goes back to what Brother Jim said, modesty is not foul language and things of that nature. So it's not just appearance, but it's outward attitudes also. And then it says that inward adornment is to have a meek spirit, meaning humble, gentle, being a servant. Meekness is God's road to greatness. And I'd made the comment a time or two that this does not mean that you have to be a doormat or that you're walked on. Being meek and gentle does not mean that. If we go back to Joseph and look at Joseph when he was in Egypt, when Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him, what did he do? He ran away. Other than that, what attitude did Joseph have while he was in the employment, I suppose we could say, of Potiphar and Potiphar's wife? He was meek, he was gentle, he was kind, he took care of business, even though the technical term, he was not employed, he was a slave, but he did all that. So being meek and mild does not mean that you have to forfeit your convictions.
It's interesting, at least in the King James of 1 Peter 3 and 4, and the words are in italics, which I think means they were added, but it says even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit. The idea that that's what's going to catch the eye, that's what's going to be that flashing thing, that's what's going to be attractive to people that are looking at you. Not all this stuff he just listed, the plating, hair, the gold, the apparel, but that meek and quiet spirit is what's going to shine through. Not only to God, it says that's what in the sight of God is a great price, but also to other people that are looking at you as well.
Correct. So if we are take on the aspect of meek, mild, gentle, cooperative, humble, all of that is words that God would use to describe how we're supposed to be. But like I say, it does not mean that we're to be walked over, walked on. We still maintain our convictions and do what God tells us to. Any other questions or comments on that line?
Another example is Joseph and his brothers. Joseph was the informant to Potiphar. He gave him, set him up for a better life.
Yep. Even after they had mistreated him so badly, he still treated them kindly.
It shows a contrast in verses 3 and 4. At the end of verse 4, Jeremy was talking about, to God it's a great price for something, whereas how much are people spending on the things in verse 3? He doesn't say that those things are wrong. I've got gold wedding ring, so he doesn't say that they're wrong. He says we have to consider which is more important, more valuable.
Mm-hmm. Time is running short. Well, let's get down to item number 4. It says that a good way for women to act today is wives to act today is to imitate holy women of the past. Elizabeth, who was righteous with her husband in Luke 1, 5 and 6. Manoah's wife, who sought to be holy with him. Now the outline says Jud, which I thought was Jude, and that didn't work, but it's Judges chapter 13 dealing with Manoah's wife. Rachel, who was an encourager to Jacob. See, holy women in a marriage can also benefit a husband by encouraging him in things that he wants to do, can do. We get the idea sometimes that women nag. What does the scripture tell us about nagging women? It tells us it's better for us to live on a housetop by ourselves than in the house with a contentious woman, right? So, as I say, it goes both ways, but this is dealing with how the women can support the husband. Ruth was dedicated to her in-laws. Priscilla worked with Aquila, her husband, in Acts. Hannah earnestly sought to give her husband a son back in 1 Samuel. Now down to 5 real quick. Husbands, dwell with your wives according to knowledge. And then it says to not divorce is not good enough. God commands a peaceful relationship to be worked out. He demands dwelling with your wife according to knowledge. And dwelling with her according to knowledge means that, number 1, going back to Genesis 2:24, you cleave, you're binded. You promote togetherness. How do you promote togetherness? You be kind to each other. What else?
Communication and gaining information with each other, the more you build your relationship.
Okay.
If you have things that you like, and I'm sure Andrea has things, and maybe you can kind of meet in the middle, and, it draws you closer to each other, togetherness.
Andrea doesn't care one bit about fishing. She loves to eat them, but she don't care anything about catching them. I've invited her to go, when I fished, I invited her to go several times. I knew she wouldn't go, but, and yesterday was another good example. I was going to come up here to the building. Brother Day and a few others came up and did some physical work. I was going to go in and print off some more of the books and everything. And I was talking to Andrea, and I said, do you want to go up there with me? And she says, nothing for me to do, is there? And I said, well, not really. I mean, the printer prints them off and I bind them together, but she was welcome to come up here with me. But she chose to stay home, which I didn't, that's not an issue either. But what if I had said to her yesterday, I'm going up to the building to do work, you just stay here? What's the difference? Difference is I didn't want her to come versus I'd love to have you company, but I understand you got other things to do. Promoting togetherness just means that you promote togetherness when you really enjoy each other's company.
I think one of the hardest lessons to learn in marriage is it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Good way to end. It's not what, but did you have anything else on that one?
Well, because I could say that those two examples that you gave right there, I'm going up to the church if you want to come with, or I'll be right back, I'm going to go up to the church. It can be taken multiple different ways, both ways. But to me, it may mean the same thing. So you have to really